Hello and welcome to ExamSoft's webinar series. I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today. We're joined by Dr. David Lenihan, who is a pre-clinical dean for Touro, New York College of Osteopathic Medicine. I'll give you a little bit more information about Dr. Lenihan in a second. Just wanted to cover a couple of quick particulars with you. Since we have so many participants today, we have everybody on mute. You can ask questions using the question pane on your GoToMeeting screen, and we will get to those questions at the end. I encourage you to ask questions throughout the entire webinar. So as you're thinking of something, you can put it into words then, but we'll hold them till the end so we can answer them in order. And occasionally we'll get some similar questions, so we'll aggregate those together. The webinar will be recorded, so we will send out a recording of it within a couple of days of the webinar being done. Again, if you have any questions, please ask them via the question pane. So back to Dr. Lenihan. As I said, Dr. Lenihan is with Touro College, New York College of Osteopathic Medicine. He's a preclinical dean. Touro is one of our earliest customers, and they're one of the first schools to really use computer-based testing heavily in high-stakes exams and even on low-stakes exams as well. Touro, New York, or Touro systems, 4 medical schools are getting ready to open up their 5th medical school very soon. We have a case study written about Touro that we'd be happy to share with everybody on the call. And we're honored and excited to have Dr. Lenihan joining us today for this webinar. So with that, I will pass it off to Dr. Lenihan.
Great, thanks Ken, and hello to everybody. I'm happy to be here. We're going to talk a little bit about today about some of the processes that we've put in place to help with student retention. And the reason why we started looking at this and how we got to there was because a medical school is actually capped to the number of students they're allowed to accept. And we get in the neighborhood between, when I started, about 4,000 applicants for our 100 slots, to now we're getting about 11,500 applications for our 100 slots. And the key thing is, how do you actually select the right student for your school? How do you select the student that's going to be able to make it through? And in order to do that, you need to have some type of measurable outcome, some assessment measure. And what we've been able to do, and I think very successfully, is use these measurable outcomes to help improve our retention rates within the school. Because we can't expand our class size, so to speak, if a student drops out, we lose that revenue. We lose that revenue for all the semesters that that student would have been in the school. And one of the things that we've been able to do, and I'll show this as we go through, is by improving our measurable outcomes, by improving our ability to assess students, we've been able to rationalize about $2.2 million per year just by helping improve our student retention. So what Ken and I thought would be really good is to discuss how do we go about implementing these ideas, what kind of led to us developing this structure, and how could you guys as deans and administrators at other schools use this to help in predictive modeling of students. The second thing is that when you look at it, I think if you think investment banking, so just think investment banking as we go through this, a lot of the policies and the procedures that we put in place aren't very unique. I know they're going to sound unique in education, but they do exist out in the world of business and finance and those things, outcome measures. And so what we've really tried to do is figure out a way to bring in best business practices from different industries and bring it into education and use it on a daily basis. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. And as we go through this process, I'll describe a little bit more about myself and how I came into this position. And then at the very end, I'm going to show you how it works. We're going to have a series of questions. I'll show you how you actually implement these ideas into the classroom. Probably the most common thing I hear when I talk to other schools or I show other people how to do this is, "That's great, Dave. This is just a fabulous program. We can see the value in it all over the place." And then what do I hear? "It's great, but it would never work in my class." Great ideas, but my class, my topic, my school, very specific. It will never work here. I think you got to think about that for a few moments. There may be classes, there may be opportunities where this won't work. I just haven't seen it. And what I would challenge you to do is think about what the benefit's going to be to the student and the benefit to the faculty member as we go through this, because a lot of the faculty members don't like change. I'm sure we've all understand that, but if you can show or see the value that this provides in the way you deliver your content, your objectives to the students, you'll find that the teaching process is much more fun for the faculty member giving it. So with that as an outline, we'll get started. When you look at this first slide here, we're kind of looking at the history of what's happening in medicine. We all know who Hippocrates is. Hippocrates kind of founded medicine and said that we need to observe the patient. So all the studies that happened 2,500 years ago dealt with observation. You would look at a patient. You didn't really touch the patient too much, but you observed. You kind of developed some type of theory of what was going on, and then you would apply that to different types of patients. The big person in medicine that a lot of times people don't know of is Galen. What Galen did was he said, all right, let's take this observation and let's go a step further. And he started doing experimentations on animals. He started doing experimentations on people who were dead, and he wrote prolifically. He wrote tons and tons and tons of work, and given that time in history was very, very large. But what happened was he wrote so much and he did so much that medicine really went stagnant. Before I go any further, I live in New York. I'm recording this from New York, and every once in a while you might hear a siren go by. I do apologize for that. It's just part of the process of working in New York. But Galen was kind of the main person in medicine. For 1,500 years, medicine did not advance. It was completely stagnant. No one did research. No one did any type of advancement. And the reason for it was because Galen did it. Everyone said, well, Galen did it, so we don't have to do it anymore. And so medicine stuck. And then came this gentleman named Dr. Vesalius, and about the same time the printing press came around. I consider him to be the ancient time of the Renaissance Bill Gates. He realized that a lot of the stuff Galen talked about was wrong. A lot of the stuff, the way it was taught, was wrong. And so what Vesalius did was he started to talk about what was wrong and brought this idea of experimentation, observing kind of the idea of evidence-based medicine, but in anatomy and how we teach into education. We're in the Andre Vesalius model. Right now, the way we teach in medical schools across the United States is still the professor gets up in front of class, the students sit there, they take some notes, they do some work, and then they come back and they study it, and they take an exam to see how well they know the material. The advantage we have today is technology is really changing this. The fact that we're having this discussion over the internet, the ability to deliver content, classes, material, content, is amazing. And so right now, this period in time is what the historians, I think, are going to write about in 1,000 years. How we're able to take our technology and our content and our objectives that we're trying to get our students to learn and deliver it in a new and unique way. Instead of sitting there in class taking notes, there's got to be other ways to do that. And what we came up with this idea called the LEAH method, lecture, exams, and assessments, where we use outcome metrics, we use value in the classroom, we use predictive modeling, and I'm going to talk about all these, and online lecture delivery, and a standardized curriculum to help us meet some of these goals. How do I go to the next slide? Hey, Ken, can you go to the next slide? There we go. So one of the things that's really quite interesting is most recently in the New England Journal of Medicine, there's an article, and it said, do we still need to have lectures? Do we still need to have lecture halls to deliver these lectures? Now, I know that what I'm going to talk about really focuses on medicine, but there's really an opportunity to relay this out to all divisions in the K through 12, colleges, and everything like that. And one of the things that's highlighted down here in the bottom is that it's time to change the way we educate doctors. Since the hours available in the day have not increased, how can we expand the medical curriculum? How can we expand the knowledge? The information the students are required to learn is growing much faster than we have an ability to teach it. So we have to have a rethink of how we deliver, how we educate our students, and how do we know that they learn the material? How are we going to assess that they learn the material? And that's really the key thing in determining how to drive retention. Now, one of the things we use in our school is we use a student response system. I'm going to talk to you about this. We actually monitor students second to second in the classroom. So every time they hit an answer in the classroom, every time they do something, they have some assessment, we actually record it, we track it. And one of the things that's very interesting, and this article brings up, is a lot of times when you're in class, if you've been teaching or you're a faculty member, you'll ask a question in class. And you usually have about 10%, the same 10% answer the questions. By bringing some student model in, or excuse me, by bringing some assessment model like the iClicker into the classroom, you allow the students, all the students, to participate in the academic program that the faculty member is delivering. And we call this, and we're going to talk about this in a few seconds, called the dynamic curriculum. It actually allows the professor an opportunity to change his lecture on the fly based on what the students know in class. And what this article here is talking about, this is from the LA Times, is it's looking at religious institutions. It's looking at churches. And what they found is that a lot of times the kids in class, the kids in church, don't speak too much. They have a view, they have an important thing to say, but they're too shy to say it. By bringing student response systems like the iClicker, like Turning Point, it doesn't matter which you use, you can bring these students out and get them more engaged in the class, and the faculty member, and I'm going to talk about this in a second, is able to use this information very easily to direct how they go about developing their curriculum. And then the last thing we're going to talk about is how we've taken these iClickers and linked it in with ExamSoft so that we can track objective measures. So we have 4 parts to this LEAH method. We have the objective-based convergent curriculum, which means that when we teach topics, we try to get classes to teach in the same longitudinal fashion or the same topics. And you could do this if you had an English teacher and a history teacher. You can teach the language and the history at the same time. For us, we make sure our physiology and our anatomy are linked together. So we set the goals before we even open the school. The second part is what we call small group peer-to-peer learning. There's a philosophy here that we're going to talk about that I think a lot of you might find a little bit strange. And I'm just foreshadowing here. But we want the students to work together in small groups to develop answers. The third thing we're going to talk about is faculty assessment. We always monitor the students. We always track how well the students are doing. But you also need to track how well the faculty are doing. You need to determine if the faculty are teaching the material they say they are. Are the students learning the material? That allows you to have this feedback loop to the objective-based convergent curriculum, so this point here and this point, so they can link together so you can make assessments on how well you're teaching your objectives. And again, that's to improve outcomes and your retention, which I'll talk about in a second. And the most important thing that I think the LEAH model has is the predictive modeling. How do we go about assessing whether a student learned the material? How do we go about determining whether or not that student's going to be able to perform well on nationalized, standardized tests? And so we'll go through those as we move forward. When we look at retention, what's retention actually provide for us? Well, in California, they're trying to pass a constitutional amendment which is going to require colleges to fix their tuition to the freshman rate, so there can be no increases in tuition. Now, if you're a college administrator, this is going to be pretty scary, because the only way that you can bring in revenue is by research grants or by tuition. And if you're restricted on the amount of tuition you're able to increase because of constitutional requirements, what's another way that you can bring in extra revenue? Retention. If you can get the students to stay in school, if you can reduce the dropout rates, you can improve your cash flow day one. For us, we've been able to improve our cash flow. You can see how that happens over time there. We reduced our attrition rate from 8% to 2%. By doing that, we saved $2.2 million a year in instantaneous cash flow. That's straight cash right into our coffers. I don't have to make some fancy accounting. I don't have to kind of readjust my balance sheet for depreciation. This is straight cash into the system because we have models, we have predictive models to determine who is the student that's most likely to drop out of school. If you can identify who the students are most likely to drop out of school, you can step in. You can start taking action. You can help them get through the curriculum. One, you help them realize their dream because they've now graduated from your school. And second, you help your cash flow in the school because these students don't drop out. So if you fix the tuition rates, and we can't have tuition increase forever, here's kind of the rate it's been increasing over the last couple decades, we can't have that growth much higher than inflation. So eventually that's going to cap out. So how are we going to increase our revenues in the schools? by decreasing our dropout rate, and we're going to talk about how we go about identifying who these students are who are likely to drop out. So there's 3 parts to the LEAH method. It's lectures, exams, and assessment. And the H is for healthcare. What we find is when I go around and look at schools is some schools are really good at lectures. They got fantastic teachers. Some schools are very good at the exams. They have very good quality exams. They spend a lot of time on it. Or some schools are really good at assessing. What we need to recognize is that each one of these segments is equally important. And that's what this graph is trying to show. You have to have the assessment to determine whether or not your exams or lectures are going well. You have to have your lectures to deliver the content to exam and assess the students. And you need the exams for the assessment and then determine how well your lectures are doing. So the first thing we're going to talk about is something called the objective-based convergent curriculum. When a student actually walks into our school, we give them this handbook. And what the handbook is, it outlines every class that they're going to take. It outlines every objective they're expected to learn every day of the curriculum. So this student, when he gets the book, will realize in his biochemistry class on October 22nd, they're going to go over cholesterol and bile salts. Here are the 6 objectives they're expected to learn that day. When the student walks into school, the very first day, they know exactly what they're expected to learn every day for that entire year, what the objectives they're expected to get. If you think back when you were a college student, and I know this happened to me, I went to school in Edinburgh and Cambridge in the UK, a lot of times we would get these syllabi that were 1 page. And the page would have the professor's name and an office hour, maybe a phone number and some emails. And it might have a grading scale and a few objectives they expected to meet. That's no longer acceptable. The federal government's going to mandate that that's not acceptable anymore, probably by 2014 according to the white papers. You have to give the students the objectives you expect them to know. What you need to do is give the student all the objectives you expect them to know day 1. So when they come into school that first day, you hand them a syllabus that outlines all the objectives, all the dates, all the topics. And you have to go a step further than that. That's just not the key step. The key step part of this is that when you write exam questions, you're going to start tagging them back to these objectives. And then you're going to start getting feedback of how well the students do on these objectives. That's one of the nice things ExamSoft has allowed us to do, is because they actually have those objectives set in. So our key objective is biosalts and acids. So we have that as an objective for biochemistry. So we know that relates back to this specific lecture. And then we can start seeing how well they learn these specific objectives on cholesterol and bile salts. With that information, we can then start adapting our curriculum to fill out where we're weak and where our strengths are, and that helps us really deliver a much better product to the students. The second thing we do is we let the students see exactly how these courses relate with the other courses they're taking. So they can see how well this topic, these objectives, are going to relate to the other modules that they're actually going to take. This kind of sets in the point of the ExamSoft. When we write the questions, we type the question in here, we type the answers in here, but we're going to talk about how we deliver our curriculum in a second. But suffice to say, when the student gets their exam report back, they see something like this. And because we tag the lectures, the objectives on the exam, we can tell the student that this question came from Lecture 12, Objective 1, and the time, the very specific time with which that material was taught. Video time code, 37 minutes and 20 seconds. What that allows the student to do is not come into your office and say, I think this question is right, I don't understand it, what are you doing? You can tell the student, look, here's where the material was taught, go back, review it, and if you have some difficulty after you reviewed it, then we can discuss it further. It allows the student to be more efficient in their study patterns, and it puts a little bit more onus onto their own responsibility. And you'll see how that works in a few seconds. The second piece to this is what we call a small group peer learning. How are we going to get the students to learn this material? And I'm going to talk a little bit about this. I used to consider myself probably one of the best lecturers there is in New York. I teach neuro. I get kids from NYU and Columbia. They come listen to me. They come to my lectures, and my class is always crowded. I give a talk. No one has their computer open. Everyone, pays attention to me. And there was this one lecture I gave, it was on the blood supply to the brain. Like I said, I teach neuro. And there's a thing called the circle of Willis, which sits on the base of the brain, and it supplies vasculature, or blood supply, to the brain. And for 2 hours, I talked about this specific topic. I talked about the vessels that come from it, the strokes, what happens in patients. Everyone in the classroom was nodding. They're all listening to me. No one had their computer open. The class was packed. People are sitting on the floor. I mean, as a teacher, it's like theater. You get a bit of a high from it. It's real exciting. So at the very end of class, I said, take out your student response system. We were using a different thing than iClicker at the time. And I said, all right, which one of the vessels is the most commonly stroked in the human? Now you have the front, which is anterior. You have the middle, which is middle. And then you have the back, which is posterior. And then I made up another one, a fourth one. And I said, go ahead and vote. Now for 2 hours, I've almost lost my voice, and I've been talking about this. And if you look here, this is the results we got. This was the front, this was the middle, this is the back, and this is a made-up. So if you look there, it's 25% roughly across the board, which means no one had any idea what I was talking about. I think my lecture is awesome. I think everyone understands what I say. But when I give the students a question, how well do you know this stuff, they don't know it. Now there's two possibilities here. The first possibility, and it's probable, although not likely, is that all 200 kids in that classroom are stupid and they can't understand a genius like me. Right? It's possible, but it's not probable. Most of the kids are smart, especially in medical school. They're intelligent kids. They just didn't understand what I was saying. The second thing, if it's not all the kids are stupid, is what if I stink? What if I'm not really a very good professor? I think I'm good. The kids like me. I'm running around the classroom. I wave my arms. I'm exciting. It's entertaining. But they don't understand what I'm saying. It's a tough realization when that happens, I can tell you. When you think you're good and you realize that probably you're not as good as you think you are. And this really led to the development of the system we're going to talk about. And the philosophy is this. What if the students collectively are smarter than the professor? I know that's kind of a long step for a lot of us that are actually faculty. But what if the students can take the material that you provide them, and in groups, they can learn the material better than you can deliver it to them? So how do you nurture that philosophy in the classroom? So one of the things we did was, all right, let me carry on. I got off track there a little bit. So the second vote was, that you see right here, is I told the students, I got mad when I looked here, and I told the students, you got 5 minutes to figure out the answer. So all the students got on the computer, they looked around, they started talking with their neighbors, and all of them had the right answer. So they learned the material by doing that. So that's how we got to that, what if the students can learn it better. So we decided to change the way we deliver the curriculum. And it's kind of similar to what some of you might have seen as the Khan Institute, where we actually give the students the lecture ahead of time. And here's an example of a lecture. I'm just going to, sorry, let me get this here real quick. Well, hey Ken, can you get this video going? One of the things that we're able to do is we deliver the videos, the lectures, to the students. Now think back when you were a student. If you're anything like me, I had biochemistry at 8 in the morning, I had physiology at 9, things like that. I couldn't stay awake. I'm not a morning person. So what would you do? You would go to class, you'd put a tape recorder. I'm sure if you're a faculty member, you experienced this. The kids put a tape recorder up in the front of the class, and they record it, and they put their head down, or they go off and do Facebook or do something else. So why not just give the kids the video? Why not just give the kids the lecture up front? Say, all right, you guys watch the lecture on your own time. Here's the material you need to learn. Just let it play, guys. It'll catch up. So why not just give the students the lecture and let them do it at their own time? They can stop it, they can fast forward it, they can rewind it, they can do all the things necessary, and they do it, and they take their notes at home. And then they come into class and they do the homework. They do the material that you're expecting them to learn. So what we do is we give the students the lecture up front, which is kind of playing right here. You'll see this in a second. We outline the objectives that they're expected to learn. Now this matches exactly with that syllabus handbook we gave. And then we have a studio where we have a professor. Those of you in medicine will know Conrad. We give the student the lecture up front. The student takes notes and they come into class and they ask questions. The professor asks them questions to go through the material. So what this does for me is I can reduce the amount of class time necessary, because I got all the lectures happening offline, and the classroom's really about engaging the material. It improves the student-faculty ratio because I don't have to have as many lectures. I can get smaller groups. The third one's really the key, enabling real-time assessments of students' understanding. How we do this is we put up a question and we let the students answer it. So we throw up a question, is on this one here, what's the artery most commonly stroked? And we make them answer. Now the reason why we do this, and I'm sure some of you have experienced this, is if I were to go into the classroom after this lecture and I say, which one of these vessels is the most commonly stroked vessel in the patient? And I wait a couple seconds, I let the students talk, figure it out, and then I go, it's the middle cerebral artery. I guarantee every student in that classroom would have shook their head and said, yeah, that's right, I would have chose that, that's the correct answer. The reality is no one knew what the answer was. They think they do, but they didn't know. They don't know what they would have done in a high-stakes exam. So what we do is we force the student to actually commit to an answer. So they have to choose an answer. What would they have actually done if this was a high-stake environment? The second thing we do then is we take the vote. The professor looks at the vote in private, and we let the students talk to themselves. So they get 2 minutes on their own to talk about it, to figure out what the answer is. Now you might think, well, the student's just going to say the answer is B. They might. I can tell you that doesn't happen very often. It can happen, but most students do want to know what the answer is. So they'll say the answer is B, and here's why. Then we take a vote the second time, and we monitor this second vote. So they have an incentive to make sure they get that vote correct on the second vote, because that's going to count towards their final grade. All right? Then what we do is we have a discussion. We give the professor 5 minutes to discuss this material. Now think about this for a second. If everyone gets the question right the first time and the second time, why spend any time in your lecture discussing the topic? If everyone gets it wrong the first time and wrong the second time, you're given time to reinforce that material. You're given time in the lecture to talk about the material that the students do not understand. It's what we call a dynamic curriculum. Now here's what's actually transpired since we've started to do this. Prior to instituting this method, I could not get 10 kids to go to class. A medical student, most valuable commodity he has is time. They all think they can go learn it on their own. They can't, but that's what they think. We have to get the students into class. If you deliver a valuable product to the students, something that they know is going to be useful for them when they get into practice, above and beyond just having to listen to you lecture, they're going to come to class. I've had to, twice this year and twice last year, actually go down into the classroom and kick kids out of class, because they know that the material they're learning is high yield. The professor's not just talking about stuff they know. The professor's actually spending time in the lecture talking about the stuff the students don't know. And that's where this model allows us to do that. We're able to identify the topics the students don't know in real time and allow the professor to talk about that stuff. The nice thing about it is for the professors, they're not talking as much in the classroom. They're doing more listening. They're hearing what the students are discussing, and they're actually doing teaching. Think about what you're doing now in lecture if you're standing up in front of the class and you're teaching. You're telling them what you think they don't know. You're kind of giving a series of information, some objectives to them. With this model, you've done that already because you've given them the lecture up front, and what you're now doing is the material they don't know, the objectives they did not learn, you're spending time in your classroom teaching the students what they don't know. When the faculty get accustomed to doing this, they're going to love it, because it's much more fun than just giving the same lecture you've done for 10 years. You're actually engaging the students. They're part of the learning process on a day-to-day basis. The last thing is this question right here, we track. I'm actually tracking how well they do that every time they click an answer, so that I can develop what we call an early warning system, so that we can identify students at risk, so that we can step in if there's a problem. And I'm going to talk about that at the end, so I'm not going to go too much on that. But we have a studio. We prepare the lectures. You can see we have the teacher there. It's kind of like the weatherman screen, and you can do that. This is another form. This is a behavioral medicine. This is Dr. Jeff Gardier, if it plays. And you might have seen Jeff. He's on CNN all the time. He's on Fox. He's on Dr. Drew. But one of the other things I'm able to do here is I'm able to go out into the real world and get the best possible people to deliver my curricular content in these lectures, on these videos. What can I do then next? I then have my faculty take the information that these experts in the field are giving and talk about the clinical, talk about the cases those students are expected to learn in the classroom. So you can't have a completely online system where you deliver all your lectures online. I know Stanford's trying to do that. I don't think that's the answer. I know Khan's also trying to do that. I don't think that's the answer. You have to have some part where you have the students in the classroom where you're actually assessing them, or in some type of environment where you can actually assess them. So you can see Jeff, he's kind of a different type of character. He's not running around quite as much as Conrad. He's not waving his arms. He's much more reserved. That's okay. You can have all types of different lectures providing this. The last thing that this model does is that the professors have all their lectures, all their exams, all their objectives set before the academic year even begins. So when you come to school the very first day, all the lectures are ready, all your exams are written, all your objectives are there. So your job during the year is not to revamp your lectures, it's to review how well that teaching was done. How well did that video lecture do? How well did that exam question work? How well are those assessments? And then what you're doing is you're writing that up all the time so that you can improve these over the summer and make your curriculum better. Faculty assessments. So it's important that we actually invest in our faculty. A lot of times as administrators, we know the faculty there, they're delivering our product, but sometimes there's this firewall where we don't have a communication between the two. We have to figure out a way to bridge that. We have to get the faculty more engaged with the administration and what's actually going on. And here's how we do it. The faculty gives an exam. I actually, as the administration here, when it's an online exam, grade all the exams. I set the curve, I grade all the exams, and I give the material back to the professors. The reason I do that is I want the faculty members not to be distracted by curves, not to be distracted by how well a student did, but to be focusing on the curriculum, to be focusing on the academic program they're actually delivering and helping those students who are in trouble. So here's what we do when we talk about the faculty. I have this thing called the student evaluations. Now I'm sure your school does this. I'm sure your school goes out, the dean or the chair, somebody goes into the classroom where the students are and they go, student evaluations are very important. We take these very seriously. We care about what you say. Please take this seriously. And you go out, you collect the information, and probably someone looks at it, goes to the faculty member, but you don't act on it. What I tell my students is that your evaluations mean very little. And again, it's a bit of a shock, but it really doesn't mean that much. Because what we found is that the teacher who gives the student A's gets a great evaluation, and the student who gives the student C's and B's and has a really tough course doesn't get a very good evaluation. I care about predictive outcomes. So we care a little bit about what the students say, and if there's something kind of way off the mark, we're going to step in. But really, we're just trying to see what are the students feeling about the classes. It's not the key point of what's going on. Right here, psychometric data. What we do is we have standards in the school, and when a professor writes a test, and ExamSoft allows us to get the data out, we start looking at things called the Coulter-Richardson ratio, which is a reliability of the whole test, and we look at the biserials of each question. And what we do is any question that doesn't achieve a biserial for us of 0.2, and any exam that doesn't achieve a reliability of 0.7, we make the professor write a report back to the administration on why. Now, I know what you're thinking if you're a faculty member. That's not the way I've done it for 30 years. I've been grading my own tests like that. What you need to do is make sure that you're addressing every question. Are you reviewing every question? So what we do is we set metrics. The professors have to achieve those metrics. They have to achieve that 0.2 biserial. If they don't, they have to explain to me why. They have to say, well, everyone got the question right, so the biserial is 0. That's fine. That's an answer. They could say, we miskeyed the test. It should have been B. I accidentally chose A. That's fine. We can fix that. But if that biserial is low or it's a negative, and the professor thinks they taught the material very well, the students obviously didn't learn it. So what we do is we tell the professor, fine, you had a biserial less than 0.2. I want you to explain to me why you think the students didn't learn it, how you're going to improve it for this year, how are you going to ensure the students learn it so that they can learn the material for the national boards, and 3, how are we going to improve that for next year's curriculum? What objectives are we going to change? What part of the lecture content are we going to change? What questions are we going to ask in those iClicker sessions? And here's the type of report that you get. So you can see the numbers and they write out what they're going to do. But what that causes, it means right now roughly we give an exam, every class gives an exam about every 3 weeks. Which means that every 3 weeks our faculty are reviewing their curriculum. They're continually assessing it. Now at first I got to admit it was difficult to get them to do it because it's work, they're not accustomed to doing it, it's not the way it's been done elsewhere. But once they start doing it, and once they start paying particular attention to that outcome that you get, that report you're getting from ExamSoft on the statistics of each question, they start realizing maybe they're not the best professor in the world. Just like me, there's a realization that maybe I didn't teach this material very well. Maybe I didn't teach the credit cycle very well, and the students didn't get it. And then we start talking about, all right, that's fine, but you need to know that information up front, and then you can start working with it. And this is all going to relate to student retention in a few seconds, I promise. The last thing we do is we measure what we call the weekly pulse. The University of Vermont in the 70s was in a bit of trouble. They didn't have much money in endowments. They got a new president. The president came in and started assessing or asking the students, what do you like about the school? What do you think is important with the school? By just asking a few simple questions, he was able to identify problems in the school quickly and make changes. So what we do every week is we ask the students in a Google survey. It doesn't cost any money. It's free. We ask them, do you like the school? Do you like your faculty? Do you like your student government? And do you like the administration? And we track it. So a lot of times we know what things are happening in the school before the students do. For example, if we give an anatomy exam, we know that their happiness in the school is going to drop. That's fine. We know that. We know that's an expected outcome. But if it starts deviating from our expected trends, we can step in. Many times the faculty, many times the administration know there's a problem in the class before the students even recognize it. We can call a town hall meeting. We can get in with the students. We can figure out what the problem is. Most of the time it's stress. It's a lot of work for them in medical school. And so we can do something about it. We can have a party. We can have a faculty forum. Or excuse me, a student forum. Or we can do something about that to let some of that stress go. But again, just like with the exam psychometrics, just like with the weekly pulse, you need to know that information. You need to be a measuring source. You need to have those outcomes because you need to be able to react on it quickly. So here's some of the questions we ask in our faculty evaluations to the students. So pretty standard stuff. We use SurveyMonkey for that. Won't go too much into that. We then take the faculty and we give them the report. So we show how well they were at each one in the student's perspective. We show them what the school average is, where they were for each class. We then track their biserials and their Tudor-Richardson ratio. So the professor gets this every week on how well they've done. Are they hitting the mark? And so you can see here 0.2 is our mark. So not every teacher hits it all the time on average. That's okay. We're just looking at it. So we're measuring it. So we're getting better and better. And then what we do is we rank the professors on how well they do. I will tell you at our school that we are completely transparent. We release this data out to the students. We give it to the faculty. Just like in investment banking, you're going to rank all your people. We do the same thing. The students already know this. They know that this professor is going to be at the bottom and this professor is up at the top. But by giving it to them, they feel like they're part of the solution. They're buying into the program that you're delivering. The last part, and I think the most important because we needed to go through those three to get to this, is the predictive modeling and student performance. And this is just a flow chart of what we do. The faculty prepare and give an exam. Our institutional research produces analysis. That faculty review the questions and make changes, usually on the questions that have a biserial of less than 0.2. The institutional research administration grade the exam. They standardize the whole system. We produce weekly reports on early warning systems. We meet with the students at risk, and this process flows through after every exam. So we got a pretty constant system with the way it works. This is real important. This is a picture out of ExamSoft. So we write a question, and what we do is we tag the question. So we tag the course, we tag the objectives, we tag all types of things. But if you look right here, 1, 2, 3 to 7 here, we're tagging our core competencies. Every accreditation body has a series of core competencies that they think are important. And come 2015, I firmly believe that this is coming down from an administrative directive from the government, is that you're going to have to be able to prove that Jim or John or a student in a class is learning those objectives to get Title IV funding. So for your school to continue to get funding, financial aid for your students, you're going to have to be able to show that the student learned the material. And the accreditation body is going to be the body that's going to say yes they did or no they didn't. So what we do is we actually, every question we write, we tag it to one of the core competencies that the accreditation body asks. Let's get to that real quick. I'm going to come back to this in a second, so hang on. So if we go to the core competencies, I think it's next slide, yep, we can actually track them, how well the student does in each one of the core competencies here. See that? So I can tell you we had an accreditation visit 6 months ago. It was around 6 months ago. I forgot exactly. And the accreditation team comes in. I have an hour with them. And I can tell you trying to prove that your students are learning the material, the competencies that the accreditation body wants, is difficult. The team comes into my office. They say the dreaded question, how do you know the students are learning material you say? How do you know they're learning our competencies? I have my screen and my computer. I say, well, pick a student. They pick a student. I pull it up, and you can see the red line here is how well the student does on these core competencies. The blue line is the class average on these core competencies. And the accreditation body goes, you track it that intensely, you can actually do that. And I go, not only do we do this, we give these reports to the students. So when they went out and talked to the students were talking about, oh yeah, Dr. Lenihan gives us our core competencies also at the end of each quarter in the semester. So they're able to recognize that we track their core competencies. It was literally a 4-minute interview that was normally an hour with the accreditation body. They said, well, you obviously can do it. They got up and walked out. We got commendation for it. The key thing is you're going to have to start doing this. And you're going to have to figure out a way to make it happen. And you're going to have to also figure out a way, if you're making it happen, how to use this data to predict which students are likely to have trouble. All right. So we talk a little bit about how we deliver the curriculum. We talked about how we go on and categorize the questions. One thing we do here, not all of you are going to agree with this, but one of the things we think is important is faculty cheat on grades. I know a lot of us don't want to hear that, but little Jimmy might be a great student and he tries real hard, but he got a C on your normal curve. So what do? You adjust the curve a little bit, you draw the line under little Jimmy's name, and now he got a B. Or you hate some student, and I know we think we don't do that, but the reality is, as a preclinical dean in different places, I've seen this happen, so I know it occurs. So what we do is we set all the grades up front before the school even begins. And this is going to become real important with the predictive model. So what I do is I take every student that's ever been in this school before, and I throw them in a giant pool. I then take out all the students. Now we have a national board, so I take out all the students who failed the national board out of that pool. I take all the students who failed that specific class I'm talking about and pull them out of that pool. And now I'm left with a couple thousand students. I draw a curve around that. I use a z-score, which is a standard bell curve. I set the 0 at a B. I set 1 standard deviation at an A. I set minus 1 standard deviation, or here's the marks here, minus 1.5 standard deviation at the F, and that's our mark. Those are our grades going in, and they're standardized for every class. We're standardizing it to an outcome success measure, how well they actually did on the boards. There's another thing that happens with this. If you're at a very competitive school, students will often compete against each other for a grade. I'm actually in my final semester of law school, and I've actually seen kids write down information on paper and leave it out so students will get the answer wrong on a test. If you live in a competitive environment, that happens. So what we've done here by doing this is we removed all competition out of the class. No student in that classroom cohort is being competed against each other. They're competing against the 2,000 students that came before them. So what's that allow us to do then? by removing the competition out of the classroom and putting it against all the students that came before them, the students are more willing to engage in that small group learning to help each other out, because they know if they give Jim the answer, Jim's grade's not going to affect theirs. And that was a huge piece for us in medical school. Medical school being extremely stressful, the students don't have to worry about if little John or Jim is getting the answer and didn't learn it. They're willing to help them. And by doing that, we got the students to start working together to figure out these answers. And that's where it came down to the philosophy. What if the students learn the material better than the faculty can teach it? The professor gives the lecture on iTunes. We use iTunes for our delivery of our lectures. The students come to class, they answer a series of questions, working together in teams to figure out what those answers are. And that's been highly successful for us to do that. Next slide. There we go. So predictive model. And kind of how do we take all this information and how do we use it to help the school? How do we use it to help the students? I assume all of you, I'm just going to make an assumption here, all of you have an E-Trade account or you have some stock portfolio account, or at least you understand what an E-Trade account is. What we do here is we decided that students react very similar to the stock market. The stocks go up and down based on unemployment data, based on GDP, based on profit and loss statements from the industry and from the company. We've taken that idea and we brought it back down into the classroom. And what we say is each class is kind of like an area in the stock market. So you have transportation, banking, finance, construction, airlines. Well, we also have that. We have physiology, anatomy, biochemistry, clinical systems. And what we do is we track every question that the students are asked. So if a student gets a question right, we add what we call equity to their account. So every question that a student gets asked in the classroom, in the iClickers, and on exams, we determine how much that question is worth. The more difficult the question is, the more money the question's worth. The more important that topic is for the national board, the more money that question is worth. And so we have a whole series, and that's what this formula is here. We have about 29 variables we use to determine how much each question is worth. If the student gets the question right, we add the money to their bank account. If the student gets it wrong, we take the money out of their bank account. And what we do is we track the student's stock portfolio, or how much their value of their account is worth. And sometime by about the second month into their freshman curriculum, we're able to about a 0.9 correlation value, which is huge, predict what their board score is going to be 18 months later. Well, if I can start predicting what somebody's national board score is going to be, or how well they're going to learn the material 2 years out, what can I do with that? I can take these students here that are having trouble, and I can start getting them help. I can bring in tutoring. I've identified who those students are in a numeric value. And it's more predictive than just getting the grades. If you wait until the end of the semester for when John gets a grade, a C or a B or an A, it's too late. You have to be identifying these students second to second and stepping in week to week when there's a problem. And here's the reason why in this graph here. So this is a cumulative trend score that we develop, and this is what we track on week to week. And what we find is students track in a very tight band. An A student will stay in the A marks. You look at the purple here. They had one outlier here. But they tend to stay pretty close to their marks. What we do is we track that week to week. And any student who has 2 weeks and falls 1 standard deviation below their norm, we call them into the office. Because something significant happened to that student. Something occurred. Now, when I call them into my office, I'll tell you 9 times out of 10, what I hear is, I went out and got drunk. It was too much material. I couldn't handle it. Too much stress. Couldn't do it. That's fine. That's an answer. I know what's going on. It's the 1 time out of 10 where you hear, I'm being beat by my husband. My child's very sick. Mom and dad are sick, out of the country. I'm going through a divorce. All types of things. It's those people that you've now intercepted a problem before it got out of hand. And now that you've intercepted the problem, you can fix it. You can't fix a divorce, you can't fix a sick parent, but you can fix their academic, and you can help them realize their dream of becoming a graduate or a doctor in our case. Now, all that it is really is identify who they are. This model allows us to identify who those students are and we're able to step in, and that is the reason why we've been able to identify students who are likely to drop out, decrease our dropout rate, and save money in our predictive program, and get extra help to the students. So not only can students see this right here, they can drill down to see how well they're doing in each individual area. So we can help them do better on the national boards. That's been very, very positive for us. We already talked about this. In order to get that extra revenue without raising tuition, you need to reduce your dropout rates. So how do we go about doing this? I know a lot of us, or excuse me, before we get to there, here's some of the things we've noticed, the value that we've been able to do with this. We have better management control of our curriculum because we actually have a cycle. We have a procedure in place that monitors the curriculum week to week. We have better monetization of risk. I'm able to determine how well my students are doing. I can take in a higher risk, quote-unquote, student because I know that I'm going to be able to monitor them as they go through the process and step in if there's any issues. The biggest point for an administrator is number 5. It's the accreditation acceptance. Just by tagging in your core competencies, and that's easy enough to do in ExamSoft, by tagging in your core competencies, you're able to show them that you're measuring how well the students learn the material. And that's what you're going to need to do to continue to get your Title IV funding in the future. And as taxpayers, I think we should also demand that colleges are actually teaching the material they say they are. And the last thing is you get an improved cash flow, instantaneous. Just by identifying who the students are, you will see that day one. Where you see this advantage, I really think the biggest place this will have the biggest advantage is in law school, because you can do that Socratic method on iTunes, and then you can have the students come in and go through the question and answer cycles. But it's worked great for osteopathic and medical schools. We've done it very successfully. Faculty buy into it once they get involved in it. They like it, they understand the value, and it's more fun for their teaching. But I think, I talk about this, but how does it actually work in real life? And it's one thing for me to talk about it, but it's another thing to do this. Now, I thought we were going to have the voting system here, so I don't have that, but I'll show you how we actually work it. So the professor walks into class. He doesn't say anything. And I want to play this out a little bit for you. So you see this question here. Which city is furthest away from where you're sitting right now? Now, you guys might be all over the world, but in a classroom where all the students are in the same place. What you note here is that this is a 3-tier question. You have to know a certain bit of information here. You have to know what the structure is you're looking at. You have to know where that structure is located. And you need to know how far that is from where you're sitting. So this is called a 3-tier complex question we ask. If you also look at it, it's also a question that cannot be Googled. You can't Google a picture. You have to know at least some piece of information to Google it. So you're requiring the student to have some information necessary to figure out what this answer is. So what we do is we have the students vote on the answer. So they come in and you vote on it. And usually what you'll see is, and I've done this now in several talks, and you'll see a spattering. Usually about 50% of the people get it right, which is B, and the other 25% scatter around. I then let the people talk about it. You let them discuss. And when you get in a group discussion, you'll say the Coliseum, Big Ben, the Acropolis, and the Brooklyn Bridge. So the people involved in this will see this. And then I say, all right, vote a second time. And usually the second time, almost everybody gets the question right. Everyone chooses B. Now I have an opportunity to talk about this. And this is what we call emotional learning. What I say is B is the correct answer, and now I have an opportunity to speak about it. I go right here on this third column, right there, that third column. I hope you can see the mouse. But the third column from the right, as you're looking at the screen, is where I proposed to my wife. My wife's named Karen. We went out there, and I asked her to marry me standing right there. Now, she didn't believe me. She got up and walked away, and she literally said this. She goes, if you're not being serious, I don't want to talk to you. You're being a jerk. I'm like, Karen, I'm serious. What have I just done here? What just happened in this educational experience? Most likely the next time you see a picture of the Acropolis, you're going to remember some seminar, some webinar, some goofy guy talking about the Acropolis and proposed to his wife. And you're going to have a bond, a connection to what that structure is. I've just improved your long-term memory of what the Acropolis is. And that's what we need to do in medicine. That's what we need to do in education. Figure out ways to teach the material to the student so that they can retain it and use it when they get into a job, when they get into practice, when they get out of your school. And that's been a very important piece of what we've done. And that's a big faculty development process. How do you teach the faculty to write questions to develop that emotional bond? I'll show you some other questions we look at. What's this a picture of? Again, when I do this with students, usually I do this with students trying to apply to get into medical school. They don't have any idea. But once they start talking it over with each other, they start seeing it. You can see that this is a muscle, this is a valve, these are tendons, and so it starts to become a ventricle of a heart, the inside of the heart. So it doesn't only relate to medicine. You could use it like this. I work in New York, but I actually live in St. Louis. I travel, so I bounce back and forth. But here's a question. Yankees won 27. Who's won the second most? Well, what do you need to know? You need to know what these things are, what these symbols are. You need to know it's baseball, I guess. And you also then need to know how many World Series they've also won. The Cardinals, by the way, are second. They won 11. Should have been 12 this year, but that's okay. You can do it again in spinal roots. I'll show you some other ones that are more fun. Here's a nice one. Which is the most expensive car, according to Forbes? Everyone, all the males, usually when you do this, loves this question. You let them talk, or excuse me, you let them vote. I would say most of the time when they vote, everyone votes on B. But when they talk, after that discussion, that second vote, they go to C. They learn that the Bugatti is the most expensive car. In fact, the Bugatti is about $1.5 million. The Ferrari Enzo is about $1 million. The Porsche 911 Turbo is about $450,000. And my favorite car of them, I just watched James Bond last night, is the Aston Martin. That's only about $250,000. On a faculty salary, we probably can pay for that in 100 years. But the point is, by working together in teams, we build that retention. We build that ability to understand it. And as they click the answers, I'm tracking it in my office, just like an E-Trade account. And every time they get the question right, I'm adding money to their account. Every time they get it wrong, I'm monitoring that. So we're monitoring the students all the way through to see how well they learn these objectives. And it doesn't only have to apply to cars. It can apply to shoes. This has been a very successful question I've used in the seminars. You can relate it to politics. We're going to have a new one, so Hillary's not the Secretary of State anymore. The other thing is you can teach the students how to answer standardized questions. The answer's here. If you don't know who these people are, the answer's here because one picture is not like the other. The Secretary of State always has their picture taken with the American flag. Barbara Boxer, who's in C, not so. She's in the Senate. So that's kind of the end. I won't go through the neuro stuff, but that's kind of the end of the presentation. And I'll answer any questions if there are. So how do I do that? Hello?
Hello.
Hi, Ken.
So again, I'll start reading the questions. We've had a couple of questions come in. If
Great.
you have any questions, please make sure you type it into the question box. So the first question is how have students responded to the real-time feedback, and what do they think about the reports that they receive?
That's a great question. What do students want to know? They want to know how well they're doing. How is their grade? I mean, most of the things that I get from students coming into my office is, how am I doing in school? How am I doing in the program? Students love it. In fact, I think the problem that we have with the system is I can't get the information back to the students fast enough. That tends to be more of the problem. And to solve that, we're trying to maybe build a Facebook app or some way that the students can drill down into that database and see how they're doing in all the classes. What it also does, and what the students like, is it compares them to how well they're doing, not only to their class, not only to all the students that ever came before them, but for us, we have a national standard. So they can see how well they're doing to a national standard. And it's exciting. I mean, if the student's not doing well, they're not always happy about the result, but they're excited with the ability to get that result. They're getting the results quicker. They're getting the results not at the end, but as they're moving through the curriculum, so they can focus their studying, what they're strong and what they're weak on. And so it's been very positive that way. Very exciting. And I think it shows up in kids going to class.
Excellent. So the next question is, what are your by serial and KR20 standards? And I guess I would also throw in there to add on how to use categorization in conjunction with that.
Sure. So we have a school standard. We set our biserials at 0.2 and our KR20, which accounts for multiple questions because that can get affected a little bit by the number of questions. We have that set at 0.7. And we're not saying we're firing somebody if they don't achieve it, but those are our standards that the school is trying to set. And what we do is we write a question. We then tag it with the objectives we're expecting it to learn, the student's expecting it to learn. If the biserial is less than 0.2, what our policy is that we don't feel the student learned that objective well enough. So we're making the professor say, all right, if we say the student didn't learn this material, the whole group of students, not an individual student, but a whole group of students, if they didn't learn that objective well enough, how are we going to improve it for next year, and how are we going to fix that for this year? So by measuring those biserials, it allows us an opportunity to see how the students are doing in learning those objectives on the fly. And if there's a big problem, we can step in. Maybe the class misheard the professor, or maybe the professor misspoke. But this allows us to make those changes on the fly. And so you can set your biserials at any level you want. 0.2 seems to be a reasonable number. It's not off the charts. I think national boards for us are 0.25. So we're just a little bit below a national board standard. And the students also know this. So the students see the biserials. We let them see complete transparency. We let them see everything.
Next question is the longitudinal evaluations. Are those reports generated by ExamSoft?
No. What we do is we have ExamSoft categorize the questions and the departments and the topics that they come through. We then pull those reports down because ExamSoft allows you to pull that information down in a CSV file. And then we've created what we call an ODBC link, which is just a way to feed that into a database. And then those equations that we have are proprietary so that our system figures out what the equity value of each question is. And the nice thing is the more we do this, the more accurate our model becomes. Because our predictive systems, the more data you get, becomes much more predictive. So hopefully next year I'm running a 0.92 correlation value instead of a 0.9.
And then to add a little color commentary to what Dr. Lenihan just said, we also do have longitudinal reports available as well directly from our system based on category. And you look at any student's performance by any category, exam by exam as well. Next question is, how do you tie clicker answers to ExamSoft?
Right. So this was a bit of a problem for us. It took us about 2 years to figure this out. We were able to give the clicker questions in class to get the faculty to see the data. What we had to do is I actually had to go out and hire a computer writer. And with the clicker, it generates a data set. And what we do is we pull that data set out every 2 seconds. So every 2 seconds, the computer's shooting the data out to our database. That database then goes into ExamSoft and finds the question because it's got an objective link to it, finds that question and brings it down with that objective, and then calculates those values. So that is a bit of a complex process. We have to have ExamSoft to calculate out the objectives. We have to have this data here to on the iClickers to figure out what the student responses are, and then we feed that into our database.
Okay, another question, and I can help you with this one if you'd like as well. Can you describe how students can review their exams using ExamSoft?
Well, that's a great question. We've had different approaches to this, and Ken, let me talk about some of the problems and benefits that we've had. With ExamSoft, you can actually restrict what they see, and you can restrict where they see it. The problem we had was we were getting kids writing down questions on paper and taking it out. So what we do, this is us, this is not ExamSoft, this is us, we don't let students see questions. We let them see their answer key, and we let them see what objective they were expected to learn from the syllabus handbook, what lecture that material came from, and what time code that material came from. So the student could say, all right, I didn't understand cardiovascular physiology very well. That's a big topic, but I didn't understand it very well. I know that was taught in lecture 12, time code 12 minutes. So they can go back in there and learn that. By not giving out the questions for us, what we found is we're able to really vamp up our questions, improve the statistics. We're not always creating new questions all the time, just like the SAT or the MCATs. We have a series, we have about 20% of our questions are new, but we don't release them out. We just release what the students learned and didn't learn, what they got right and what they didn't get right, and we give that to them. Ken, you want to talk a little bit about how you guys restrict access?
Sure. So to build on that, we also have two other things that help with post-exam review. One is a feature called Secure Exam Review, where it is, as it says, at the end of the exam, you're able to review the questions, the correct answers, and the way that you answered. You're only allowed to do it right after the exam. As soon as you exit the exam, you're logged out, and the exam has been secured, and you don't have any risk of data loss. Outside of, as Dr. Lenihan mentioned, somebody writing down questions, then most of the exams where our clients are using, they're not letting the students bring in paper. If they are, they have them turn it in before the end of the exam. And then the other way,
go ahead. Well, I was going to say, one of the things we found is that there's a Kinko's near us. And the Kinko's actually had the exams of the professors there. And I guarantee your exams, if you use the same questions every year, they're out. If you're a faculty member and you think you got them secure, they're not secure. They're out. The kids have created Google web calendars and Google links to come out, and they'll all remember a question. And they'll be at your local copy shop. So what we do is we just don't let them take it out, and we restrict that. Sorry, kid.
And the other thing we do is we provide at the end of the exam a student end of exam report, which, as opposed to just simply saying you got a 75 or an 85 on an exam, it shows you not only your numeric score, but then breaks down your performance by category, which helps you focus on self-directed learning and also gives you a tool by which to have a more informative conversation with your professors.
And we use that same report too, Ken. We give the students the categorized reports as they come out so they can see their objective learning. What our model allows us to do is there might be topics that are similar in multiple courses. In medicine, it's pretty similar. So what we're trying to do is we categorize topics based on what it is, not what course it is. So you might have cardiovascular physiology taught in your anatomy course, and your physiology course, and your neuroanatomy course, and your clinical systems course. So what we're able to do is provide the student, and ExamSoft allows this, a report on how well they do in that topic across multiple courses, which has been very helpful for the students in developing their learning styles.
To have another question, how do you train less theatrical faculty to better engage students?
The thing is, you don't have to. And this is if you've been teaching more than 3 years, this is easy stuff. Because what you're doing is you're listening to what's going on with the students. And so you throw up a question, and you let the students answer it, and then you let them talk. So what are you doing? You're listening to what the students are talking about. A lot of times students will get the correct answer for the wrong reason. You can bring that up in the classroom. You can say, look, and I heard John here talking about the circle of Willis, and he thought it was the middle cerebral artery because it was the shortest. Well, he got the correct answer, but he got it wrong. He got it not for the right reason. So you allow the faculty member an opportunity to discuss it. Now, the faculty member is going to be up in front of the class anyway. Now what you're doing is you're letting the students do most of the speaking, and you're just helping them guide them to the correct answer. From a faculty's perspective, and I do have less theatrical professors, they love it because they're not there speaking for 2 hours or an hour on the same thing they've done. A lot of the professors for us in medicine probably teaching the same thing for 20 years. If it's anatomy or physiology, it's pretty similar. Now what they're doing is they're letting the students teach each other, and they're helping guide that process. I can guarantee it's an incredibly much more fun way to teach. Now, I can tell you the faculty are going to say, that's great, Dave. They're probably, some of you are thinking it right now, that's great, but it will never work for my class. I teach English literature. It's not true. This will be a much more fun way for you to engage in the students, and the students will take more out of it because they feel like they're active in that learning process. But you need to, in order to make it work, you need to be able to measure those objectives to make sure that the objectives that aren't being taught are the ones you're actually talking about in class, the ones the students are struggling with. And that's what makes it fun.
Excellent. The next question is, are student progress metrics tracked in ExamSoft?
Yes. It does track it, so you can actually track the grades they got. But overall, our distributive mechanism for exam grades is we use Blackboard. So we download the results. ExamSoft allows you to download it into a CSV file, and then we upload those results after we do our manipulation to Blackboard. So I'm not sure if ExamSoft gives you that learning management system, but we use Blackboard personally.
And when we do have an integration with Blackboard to pass student information, course information, as well as Great.
Yep.
Next question. Did you say that you give points to their grade based on participation? If so, how much?
Not participation. We don't really, as a medical school, we assume they're going to participate. We give points based on the answers they choose in the class. Now, in reality, it's a participation grade because the first vote we make them do, we don't count towards their grade. We let them discuss, and then we take the second vote as their grade or count towards their final grade. So really, it's a participation grade, but we want them to think about what the correct answer is.
All right, next question. There's two of them together. Do every exam and clicker question count for a grade, and how do you tie the time in a lecture when an objective was covered with an ExamSoft question?
Oh, that's a great question. Yes, every question counts. If it's a question that's not worth asking or it's not worth any points, why ask it? We have so much material we have to cover. There's just not enough time to not ask questions that are of value. So we don't really have any questions. We do throw some questions away on the exam if there's a topic that every kid just missed and they didn't learn the material. We don't necessarily count that question. We might drop that question from the exam, but the professor has to tell me how they're going to fix it for next year and how they're going to have a review session for the students to learn it this year. How do we time that? What we have to do is, and this is a lot of work initially to set up, we record our lectures. So we record our lectures in the studio. The professor goes in there. I have a videographer. It's actually a real easy process. It doesn't cost a lot of money. We've done it for less than $20,000, and we've created almost 2,000 hours of content. But the professor goes in and does the lecture. Then what they do is they actually watch the lecture and stop it at a point and write the question of where that question came from in ExamSoft. So they might say 15 minutes, 20 seconds. They write the question. And then they put that in there's a rationale section in ExamSoft, and they'll put what lecture it came from, what objective they're expecting it to be learned from, and what time code in the lecture it came from. And that's how we do it. But here's the thing. Once you do it once you get it done, all your lectures for the next 10 years, you're only doing 20% of your lectures because you're updating your lectures as you move forward. Your exams are already keyed in. You have all that work done. So that work you're doing in that first year to get this up pays off in year 2 on. And what we're able to do is I can now get my faculty more research time. I can get them more time in the clinic. I can get them extra time to do the things that they like doing. And teaching too, but they have more time with the students then. But it allows us to open up and develop new aspects of the education system that we provide to the students.
All right, and we've got a couple more questions, and then we'll try to wrap up, so we're running a little long. When lectures change or material content is altered or updated, how difficult or not is it to remap course objectives, etc., ExamSoft, and how often is course content revised?
We're revising about 20%. We're in the first year, so we're in version 1.0, so we probably haven't done that much revision. I revised my class. I teach, like I said, neuro. I've done about 15%, or about 5 lectures, where I've redone them, where I thought the material wasn't taught very well or new topics have come to play. So we're probably running about 20% redevelopment. How hard is it to change the lectures? If you don't record the lectures properly, it can be very difficult. We save the files in MP4 form, and we save them in raw footage, so we can go back and edit it. Some of the things we do is we kind of want the faculty members to dress very similar. So if I have to go back in and splice something, the professor doesn't look completely different. That's a lesson that we had to learn. But it's not hard. If you get proper people that know how to do video, they can splice in new material fairly easily. With respect to changing the categories in ExamSoft, that's a 3-second proposition. You just go in and flip the objective over because you got a drop-down list. And so that's very, very simple to do.
Okay, I'm going to combine
and before you do that, and one of the nice things ExamSoft has now done is you can do group categorization, which is a big, big deal. If you've got thousands of questions, you can highlight them and group categorize them. So that saves lots of time. Not all the software packages do
that. You said you were using questions with clickers in ExamSoft. If these are sometimes the same question, then don't students basically have the same question through the recording devices and their notes? And then additionally, how do you weight questions that are answered on clickers?
So first, the clicker questions are never the same as exam questions. We want the clicker questions usually to be really deep thought questions, and that's not always the case for the exams. Exams, you want to just see if they got the base knowledge. With the clicker questions, we're trying to ask third-order questions. Patient presents with this. What are you going to do? How are you going to handle that? So they have to place lots of pieces of information together. You want the questions in the classroom to be hard, with the iClickers, because they're going to work together in teams to figure it out. And that's going to develop a long-term retention. So that we don't really have that problem. And what was the second part of that question, Ken? I'm sorry.
How do you weight the questions that are done via clicker?
So they're weighted 10% of the grade. So all the clicker questions through the entire year, if it's 500 or 5,000 questions asked to the students, that cumulative percentage comes out to be 10% of their grade. It's enough to where they take it seriously, but not enough to crush them. And if they miss a class, it doesn't affect their grade. We don't take attendance. We don't monitor if they're in class. I don't care if they don't show up. If they want to lose the 10%, that's fine with me. But the reality is, by doing this, by giving it just enough weight and making sure the students are learning kind of complex topics and they know the professor will explain it if the students don't understand it, you make it high yield to the students come to class, and so it was that balance. So 10% weight is what we set as the standard.
Excellent. We've got two more questions. What is student feedback regarding having to watch lectures outside class plus come to the same number of classes?
They don't have to come to the same number of classes. I didn't explain that very well then. They come to 1/4 the number of classes. So if they had 4 hours of lecture, we give them 4 hours of lecture in the video, just like they would in the lecture, and then they have 1 hour in the classroom. So they actually have extra work. So they got about 20% extra classroom work, but the 80% of it's done at home, and the 20% is done in the classroom. The feedback we get is the students like it. Now, we might be self-selecting our students because we show the incoming students this is what we do, and the students that are probably prone to like that are more likely to come to us. What I tell the students is this: if you can learn the material on your own, if you don't need the professor there to work with you, we're probably not the school for you. Go to one of the Ivies. Go to some school where you don't have to engage with the professor. We give you the lectures up front, and then we're going to challenge you in the classroom to see if you know it. And so what I tell students is, if you need someone to help you learn the material, you're not the 16, I don't know how they do the SATs anymore, but when I was 800, 800, if you're the 1600 scorer, you might not need to come to a school like us. But if you're a student that needs the help, it's somebody to deliver this information to you and put it in a manner that's going to allow you to do well on the boards and get your medical degree, I think there's nobody better than us in the country.
Great. The final question is, do you have to use a laptop to take exams on ExamSoft?
Right now you need a computer. It doesn't have to be a laptop. You can use a computer. I do know that they are considering, or hopefully they're working on, getting an iPad version so the students can take it on iPads. So we can deliver it that way. Or you can actually do a Scantron. They have an ability to print the exam off and give the students an exam on Scantron, and then we grade it and upload the CSV file into ExamSoft. We've tried that. It worked very easily. It wasn't hard. My advice, however, would be make the students take the test on the computer. If you're maybe an older professor, you might not buy into that, but the reality is all the standardized tests that they are going to take for the rest of their life is going to be on a computer. They need to learn how to do that, and so they have to learn to do that, and it's better to learn it in your class than do it the first time when they're taking their MCATs or they're taking their national boards.
Excellent. So just to clarify a little further on that, so we do offer obviously laptop-based testing. You can do testing in labs. We also do offer Scantron, and then coming in January we'll also offer an iPad version, and all of the exams can be given at the same time, so you can have students using laptops, students using iPads, students using whichever device they want to use to take the exam. We had a couple, excuse me, we had a couple of questions regarding will this presentation be available. Both this presentation has been recorded, and we'll also make a copy of Dr. Lenihan's presentation be available, although we'll probably pull out the videos because they're really big. And that will come out in the next couple of days. There are a couple of questions that we weren't able to get to, and we will send you answers directly. Dr. Lenihan, I want to thank you very much for your time today.
And Kim, before you say that, if anyone, I assume you're going to give them my contact information, and anyone wants to email me or have any questions, please feel free. I'm pretty available for that stuff. Excellent.
I will make sure to include that as well. And again, Dr. Lenihan, thank you so much for your time today. It was a great presentation. And for everybody on the phone, we will be doing more webinars like this in the future. In fact, we're looking at another webinar with Lenihan later in early October. Thank you very much for your time, and Dr. Lenihan, thank you so much for your time as well.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Bye-bye.